Now, what happens at collision is actually very complicated. This is still a caricature, but it illustrates some of the key features. Basically, on the x-axis, which is time axis, you see that two frames in Wi-Fi collide with each other. One is black frame, the other is the blue frame. And they have different received signal interference ratio. Let's say the black frame has a slightly bigger signal interference ratio, SIR. So there's some kind of SIR differential. If you take the median point of their SIR at the receiver. So if there's sufficient overlap and yet not sufficient SIR differential, then the receiver is confused. And they will say, I can't understand what you're talking about, and both frames are lost. That's one possible scenario out of a collision. Another one is that stronger frame prevails. If the SR differential is sufficiently high, then this one can be understood, and we call that a capture effect. In other words, collision does not necessarily imply both frames are lost. That's the second scenario. There's a third one, which is both are properly received. It's called double capture. For example, if they are not overlapped too close to each other in time. Now, to model this mathematically is going to be very difficult. So what we're going to do is to say, let's simplify the picture with a crude approximation that says if within the same time slot, the two packets are transmitted, even if they actually don't overlap, depends on how long it takes to transmit each one, we'll still say that they collide. And whenever they collide, we say both frames are lost. So just remember that the actual interference depends on collision phenomenon, depends on a number of things, including how long do they overlap, which depends on their timing difference, the frame size, and the transmission rate. It depends on how big is the differential SIR, which depends on things like channel conditions and transmit power. It also depends on how large an SIR is required for proper decoding at different receivers. And this can depend on the transmission rates, the kind of codes and modulation you use, and the receiver electronics. But we're going to ignore these things and just say that if within the same time slot two packets are transmitted, then I don't care, they are both declared lost in our mathematical model. You say, hey, I remember a cocktail party back from lecture 1. And I remember that we say we can do power control. Well, first try different languages, and then you say, well, if you need to speak louder, but if you don't need to, don't speak as much as loud, because it's going to irritate others, and the others will speak louder, and then you have to speak louder. So let's avoid arms race by doing volume control or transmit power control. So you may recall that degree of freedom. But actually, Wi-Fi does not use that. Well, Wi-Fi does have power control, but that's mostly for connectivity management, making sure you can hear the AP, and battery energy management, making sure you don't deplete the battery too fast. As we must have noticed that our phones, Wi-Fi is a big energy consumer, right after perhaps GPS. But why Wi-Fi does not use power control for interference management? And why not? One reason is because of the small cell size, as well as the smaller maximum transmit power allowed. So the dynamic range of transmit power you can adjust is very limited. If you speak too softly, you won't even get the beacon signal from the AP, and you have no association with them. If you want to speak louder, well, the maximum transmit power is capped, and that's in part because of the unlicensed band. You can use it, but you have to agree to set the maximum allowed transmit power to be a reasonably low value. So the dynamic range is quite small for this degree of freedom now. Another reason is because there are just so many uncontrolled interference. You may do power control, others may not. And in a game theoretic setting, you can see the pitfall of that. So unlike a tightly controlled cellular network, Wi-Fi power control has not been deemed as a very efficient interference management. Now, maybe it can be used as a supplemental tool, but what we're going to see is a different degree of freedom. Think about cocktail party again. Okay, scheduling or time is another degree of freedom, just like transmit power or frequency band. Okay. Now, one way to do scheduling is a centralized coordinator. Okay. Let's say there's a DJ or some central coordinator who says, all right, everybody quiet. Now, Alice, you can talk. Now, Bob, you can talk, and so on and so forth. Okay. In Wi-Fi, there is indeed a mode for that called a point coordination function. It's a very rare name, the PCF. The good thing is that it's actually almost never used. Okay. It's only used for certain kind of traffic and certain management traffic. But most of the time, you don't use that. Just like in most cocktail parties, you cannot afford to have a centralized coordinator. You do it in a distributed fashion in this network. Network of people in the party or network of Wi-Fi devices or what they call stations in a Wi-Fi network. Now, distributed random access is something we encounter all the time. In the cocktail parties, like, when you want to talk to somebody, okay, I want to say, how's the weather? Okay, and then you realize suddenly somebody else standing next to you wanted to talk to someone else and asked that person, right, where's the food? Okay, and when both of you start talking at the same time, well, I don't know you're going to talk, but you often encounter a following situation. Both say, like, utter one word, and then they realize, gee, we're colliding, and then they both back off. Now, unfortunately, sometimes they both start talking again at the same time and collide one more time. Okay. So this idea that says, you know what, maybe I should wait and listen. If nobody's talking, I'll talk, is actually used in Wi-Fi. This phenomena that, well, unfortunately, when you talk, someone actually so happens to pick the same time to talk and causes collision. This phenomena happens in Wi-Fi. And this situation that you back off, I'll wait, the other person says, I'll wait too, and then you both wait for 5 seconds, and then you both start talking again. That kind of synchronism is also observed in Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi tried a smarter way to break that. We also see the similar issue when you have a stop sign. Okay, say a 4-way stop sign. These are stop signs. And the cars, sometimes they arrive at the stop sign about the same time, and then they start looking at each other and who should go first. So distributed random access we use all the time, and we know intuitively that it is not efficient. That's the price you pay for a distributed protocol. Okay, we know that it's not as efficient. And the particular random access method used by Wi-Fi is a version of CSMA, Carrier Sensing Multiple Access. This is not a sister acronym of CDMA. Okay, this is a very different concept. CDMA is a coding method in the physical layer, and the CSMA is a medium access method in the link layer. Now, the difference between PCF and the distributed random access, which is called distributed coordination function, DCF, in Wi-Fi is another example, and perhaps the last one we'll encounter in this course, and by this time maybe the 4th or the 5th time, of the tension between dedicated resource allocation and shared resource allocation in a network. Okay. This is dedicated. Okay, you got the time slot. Even if you have nothing to say, well, you got the time slot. This is a shared medium. There's no right or wrong answer who is better, but depends on the situation, the kind of efficiency you want, and the kind of coordination method you can afford. Here's the typical timing diagram of the Wi-Fi. Okay, let's say there are 3 stations trying to talk to the same AP. So it could be your iPhone, your friend's iPad, and then there's a laptop somewhere in the coffee shop. Okay. So let's say station A. I should include a little wait and listen first. Okay, wait and listen and say, hey, there's nothing going on. So station A says that I will transmit some data, blah, blah, blah. And then once you're done with transmitting that data, you're going to wait and listen again. Okay. And everybody else also wait and listen. Okay. Now suppose this actually goes to, let's say B is actually not your friend's iPad. The B is the access point itself. Okay, station is a generic term that can refer to either your end user devices or the access point. Okay, so B is the access point. So B says, all right, I got your data and I'll send you acknowledgement packet. The actual ACK packet is much smaller. Okay, it's much smaller. We'll take a look at a numerical example later in the lecture. And then send the acknowledgement. All right. And then there will be another wait and listen period. Okay. And A, let's say, received the acknowledgement. Then C says, you know what, I've been waiting to send my data. Now I can actually send my data. Okay. And suppose this data collides with somebody else's traffic, and then there's no acknowledgement. That would be a different scenario. All right, now let's take a look at these time intervals. The wait and listen time interval, there are actually three, but two are most heavily used. Three different lengths of wait and listen intervals. One is called diffs. Okay, the actual words behind the acronym doesn't concern us here. So this is a longer wait and listen interval than another one called sifs. Okay, anytime that you send the data and you're waiting for the acknowledgement, that wait and listen period is called the sifs. Okay, basically the recipient of that data only need to wait a short period of time before it sends acknowledgement packet, and this constitute what's called an elemental transmission. Okay, they basically form one single unit. Everybody else who want to transmit got to wait diffs a much longer period of time. So actually C is also waiting. C says, hey, nobody's using the channel now. Okay, I can wait and try to send. But before your waiting time finish up, B already get the permission to transmit, because the acknowledgement transmission only need to wait for a much shorter time than the a new data packet. So this is a smart idea of using different length of wait and listen for a clear channel before you are allowed to transmit, and it logically prioritizes different types of packets. Okay, so this avoids a situation where somebody's data squeeze in before the acknowledgement can be received. So for this whole period, from data to sifs to acknowledgement to diffs, this entire period is called an overall time slot for a successful transmission. Now, if it's a collided transmission or there's no transmission, idle time slot, the overall duration will be different, as we'll see very soon. All right, so that's the basic timing diagram, and now we'll walk through three very smart ideas in Wi-Fi's random access. We'll see that it's not really that efficient, but nonetheless, it could have been a lot worse, a lot less efficient, had it not been for three great ideas. Idea number one, you're going to wait and listen. You're going to carrier sense, so-called, the channel. Okay. You're going to listen and say, all right, is somebody talking right now? Okay. This is just like what happens at the cocktail party. If your neighbor is blah, blah, blah right next to your mouth or ear, then you say, maybe I shouldn't talk at this point. Okay, so you sense if the channel is clear or not. Just like over here, when A is talking, let's say, suppose C can sense, then C will refrain from talking. Now, of course, soon we'll see that your sensing range may not be long enough. So you may collide with somebody, but you cannot sense, you cannot hear whether she's talking or not. We'll leave that to later. And once you get the channel, okay, you can also say, I declare our channel holding time. Okay, you can say, I really have a lot to say, so please allow me to finish this long channel holding time. Okay, up to a certain limit. So the first good idea is that wait and listen using sensing in the air. The second great idea is that just like in TCP, connection-oriented end-to-end, we're going to use acknowledgement to tell if the other end received, except this is not an end-to-end, this is a one-hop kind of acknowledgement, because the access point is just one hop away from you. And if I don't see acknowledgement, then I say there has been a collision, the packet has lost. And I know exactly where it lost. This is not end-to-end with many links. This is just one hop, okay? It's lost in this air interface of Wi-Fi. So if there is a collision, then I'm going to try to back off. Again, very similar to TCP idea. Basically, there's a negative feedback, or there is a pricing variable. Okay, whatever terminology you like most from the previous lectures in different contexts, you're going to back off. Now, back off is actually not that trivial either. Number one, you have to randomize your back off. For example, I'll say that, you know what, there's a collision at time 0. If I back off to 3 seconds later, and whatever collided with me also back off 3 seconds later, then this just leads to another collision. So I don't want to synchronize this, the exact opposite of advanced material in lecture 7, where we want to synchronize different oscillators. Here we want to desynchronize them. So how can I do that? Well, randomization comes handy again, maybe for the 4th time in this course. In this case, you say, you know what, I'll say I will back off maybe from the next time slot to 10 seconds later, all right, or 10 time units later. And you will do that from now, next time slot, 10 slots later. But I will randomly pick, uniformly pick, which slot am I actually going to back off to. Okay, and you will randomly pick one too. So there is still a chance that so happens I pick the same one as you. So you can still have collision, but that's the price you pay for a very simple distributed action with no coordination. Okay, but very likely I will pick a different one and you will pick that one that you pick. The second great idea is exponential back off. Okay, it's also called basically multiplicative back off. You say that instead of backing off, if I collide with you again, okay, instead of backing off just maybe up to 11 and then randomly pick one, I will actually back off a huge amount. How huge? If I backed off, say, by x, I'm going to next time back off to 2x. Okay, I will double or multiplicatively increase the duration of possible back off. And then I pick the spot of actual back off in time randomly. So this is similar to the multiplicative decrease in TCP. And usually it's a binary exponential back off, multiplying this by 2. So a randomized exponential, binary exponential back off upon collision is the second great idea. But now there's a problem. And in the next module, explain the problem and explain how can we tackle that with the third great idea.